Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. It is just Chris today, one half of the Formula One Bros. Thank you all for joining once again. I'm coming to you on the Wednesday after the Miami Grand Prix, and I'm coming to you on Wednesday for both James and I. It's been very busy weeks with our jobs and our personal lives, but we're coming to you. It's just me today. It's going to be me for the next couple episodes. We're both teachers and we're both getting our school years wrapped up right now. So it's going to be one of us until the summer break starts for us, which is in June. So it's just me talking about all things Miami today, and what an action-packed and eventful weekend it was. There was a lot going on. It was the second sprint weekend in a row. And which for me was incredible. It was a great event, well put on. I actually am really starting to like the sprint format, which I'll get into in a little bit. And there was a ton of stuff. So without anything else, we're just going to go ahead. I'll just go ahead and get right into it. And the first thing that I want to talk about, the first major thing that I feel like I have to talk about, and it's something that I was very much looking forward to, very excited that this was the case, but F1 Academy was back this weekend for their second race of the season. As a reminder, they have 7 rounds, all attached to Formula One Grand Prix weekends, and this was the second of 7 rounds. The first one was in Jeddah, and then we had this one in Miami, and it was all in all a great weekend. So let's go ahead and dive right into the F1 Academy weekend. There was 2 action-packed races, both dominated by Abby Pulling, who bested Dorian Pain after her dominance in Jeddah, and she also extends her lead in the championship. If you go back to Jeddah, a reminder that Dorian Pain actually won on track, finished first in both races, but received a penalty retrospectively after the end of, I believe it was race 2. No, it was race 1, and in which she failed the post-race procedure and did another racing lap at speed after the checkered flag. So she received a 20-second penalty, which promoted Abby Pulling, who was in second for both of the races on track in Jeddah, for that victory. And so now Abby Pulling has won technically 3 out of the 4 race events so far this season, and extends her lead in the championship. It was also a great weekend for Bianca Bustamante, who she stalled at the beginning of race 1, but she recovered all the way up to 9th. And in race 2, she started P2, fended off a very, very quick Pain to come home in second place for her first podium of the season, after a really strong first season last year in F1 Academy, being on the top step of the podium. And she is back on the podium once again in a weekend where McLaren was on the podium more than once. This was not the only time that McLaren was on the podium, which I will get into that later. The highlight, though, of race 1 was Chloe Chambers as an American driver, finishing 3rd and on the podium for Haas, an American team on home American soil in Miami. That was really cool to see. Chloe Chambers didn't have the best weekend, and I thought there was a little bit more to come from her in Jeddah, and she had a really strong weekend. Both races, she ended up third in race 1 and 5th in race 2, and picking up some good points for her and her team, and represented the Haas team very, very well. It was very exciting to see. All in all, there was great battling up and down the field. After some penalties, though, Leah Block ended up claiming her first points of the season after being promoted from P12 to P10 in race 2. And that is significant because she is one of the other American drivers on the grid, on the full-time grid this year for F1 Academy, and she claimed her first points, a part of the Williams Driver Academy, driving the Williams liveried car. So I think she had a really good weekend in Jeddah, and I think she was looking for a little bit more here in Miami, and didn't quite get it done. But all in all, claiming your first points of the season here on home soil is great. So congratulations to Leah Block. And last but not least, once again, every hosting country from these events is going to put up a wildcard entry, which will be run by Prema. every year. And this year it was Courtney, for the Miami Grand Prix, it was Courtney Crone. She was the wild card entry for the U.S. in Miami and claimed a P14 in race 1, but improved to P11 just outside the points in race 2. She showed some pace, raciness with some great moves. There was like this midfield battle that was happening, and especially in race 2, it was like at first, until she got up the track a little bit, was kind of bottlenecked by Maya Woog and the Ferrari in her Ferrari car, and it was like her, Leah was in there, Carrie Schreiner was in there, Courtney Crone was in there, Lola Lovenfoss, Neria Marti. Like it was tons of racing up and down the grid. Hamda Alkabasi was in there. Yeah, it was great racing all the way up and down. Lots of overtaking, lots of risk taking. I think Miami turned out being a really, really good track for the F1 Academy. It was great to have them back. It was great to have them back in F1 and at an F1 weekend. And congratulations to Abby Pulling and everybody else on that weekend. The highlights being Chloe Chambers being on the podium for Haas, Courtney Crone having a good outing as the U.S. wildcard entry, Bianca Bustamante claiming her first podium of the season, and lots of other great racing. Now on to the Formula One action from the race. Lots to get into, and since it was a sprint weekend, I'll kind of talk sprint race, and then I'll talk about Grand Prix and general notes throughout. So in general, first, right off the bat, it was a really enjoyable sprint weekend. And having two back-to-back, I didn't know. I really didn't know what it was going to be like having two sprint weekends back-to-back. Normally, I like to, kind of have them spread out a little bit. I was worried that it was going to get a little too stale, but I actually really liked the Miami sprint race, and having those two back-to-back, it was actually able to confirm a lot of positive things that I had kind of thought of from China that I think kind of confirmed a couple things for me. And the first is the format with Parc Ferme being after the sprint race. I think it definitely adds a layer of intrigue and chaos into the weekend. And I thought, it created for some great racing up and down the grid in both the sprint race and in qualifying and in the actual Grand Prix. And I like it because I mentioned this a little bit in the last episode with China. It kind of feels like, when you lock down Parc Ferme so early, it adds a little bit of chaos in that, you only have the one practice session to nail your setups, and that is a layer of chaos. But because everything is so locked down, it creates the final practice session. It kind of makes that final practice session moot. It doesn't really add anything to the race weekend. And it kind of makes the sprint just a dress rehearsal for the race. It doesn't really feel like anything is different. There's no intrigue. Nothing really changes. But for in this format, we saw it in China, and I think we can convincingly say again here in Miami that it was great. And I didn't know how the race was going to go based off of the sprint race. I just had no idea. And the race threw up some intriguing things too. But I mean, even just you had the performance of Daniel Ricciardo one day to another is intrigue in and of itself. So as just one example. So I think in general, I'm really starting to like the sprint weekend format. I think it feels less gimmicky. The flow of the weekend feels more natural, and it feels a lot closer to what I feel a sprint race in Formula One should be like. It should mean something. Every session should build upon each other, and that's the way that I do feel like it is a little closer now. Now, I think the purest form of Grand Prix racing is just FP1, FP2, FP3 qualifying in the race. I am somebody that watches all of the practice sessions, and I think they're intriguing in and of itself because I'm watching the telemetry, I'm following the lap times, I'm watching all those things. But for more casual F1 fans, I can understand why that would be boring or not as intriguing. But I think this format creates a much better flow for the weekend, and I actually really, really enjoy if sprints are going to be a part of Formula One going forward. I think this is a great format, and we're definitely on the right path to achieving it. There's just one quick thing that I wanted to clarify. The car setups are locked down between the sprint shootout and the sprint race itself. This would explain why Alex Albon did start from the pit lane. They made a change of setup in between the sprint shootout and the sprint race. They then, after the sprint race, can make changes ahead of the qualifying session when their setups are locked down for the race. So that's why Alex Albon started from the pit lane. And then teams can make changes after the sprint for Grand Prix qualifying. Daniel Ricciardo, for me, was the highlight of the sprint race. He had a fantastic race. Started fourth, ended fourth, was running third for a little bit, which was just so good to see. He had some struggles in qualifying for the Grand Prix, but we saw, I think, in the sprint race, a glimmer of the Daniel Ricciardo of old, which is good. Because there are rumors floating around that he has been given an ultimatum. I don't know what that ultimatum is, but if it's definitely one of those, if you can't improve by a certain time period or you can't achieve certain markers by a certain time period, then Liam Lawson is going to go in the car. I think that's pretty much all but confirmed, but What is puzzling for me is his drop in performance between the sprint race and and qualifying. I don't know what happened there. I don't know why his struggles changed so quickly. I don't know if they changed the format of the car, but he struggled throughout in the next qualifying session and in the race. But I think if he can kind of more often attain the level of performance that he did in the sprint race, I think there's no reason why he shouldn't stay in Formula One. So it was really, really good to see for Daniel Ricciardo. On the other hand, it was actually a tough day for Lando Norris with his DNF, but he was quick. And it would turn out to be easily managed, considering the result of his Grand Prix, which, again, I will get into in a little bit. But it was a tough day at the office for Lando Norris. The sprint race ended with Max Verstappen winning, Charles Leclerc second, and Sergio Perez in third, which, if I'm Ferrari, I think that's a really, really good thing. You know, you need to be besting Sergio Perez when you can. And if I'm Sergio Perez, I might be a little bit concerned, making sure that, you know, it's one of those moments where, you know, even when the Ferrari is strong, you have to prove that you can be that person and take it to the Ferrari. And he just wasn't able to do that in the sprint race, I think. And the Grand Prix was even more challenging for him. Again, I'll get into that in a little bit, but you know, I think Charles did everything that he needed to do. It was a great sprint race. That top three was fantastic. The last thing regarding the sprint race is we have to talk about Kevin Magnussen. What he was doing is basically what he did in Jeddah and received 3 time penalties and was summoned to the stewards after the sprint race regarding driving behavior. And this was all to back up the field so that Nico Hülkenberg can get the points. It was just driving completely erratically, completely cutting corners, driving very dangerously. And which is totally unacceptable. And the crazier thing is he even admitted that he deserved all of the penalties that came his way. He was like, yeah, they were all fair, but I was doing my job for the team, which was to make sure that Nico Hülkenberg to get points, which is definitely the wrong way to go about it. But it's a system in which that can exist because of the penalty system that we have in place. And what I mean by that is, time penalties to me are no longer a deterrent, and teams have found a way to be able to mitigate anything that may come from a time penalty. You know, at the end of a race, you know, of a 57 lap Grand Prix. Now this was a 19 lap sprint race, but at the end of a 57 lap Grand Prix, a 5-second time penalty, you know, may drop you a position. You know, so it's not really, you know, those are easily mitigated. You can serve that penalty on a pit stop. And, you know, if you do that and you get a safety car, that is pretty much null and void. And that is what happened with Lewis Hamilton when he was found predominantly at fault for his crash with Max Verstappen in the British Grand Prix in 2021. He got a 10-second time penalty. He made up that that time in the pits, and there was a safety car. And after that, there was really nothing. He made that time up in the pits. Then there was another safety car, and it was just completely managed. It was all completely managed, and I think that teams now feel like they can get away with a lot of things, and drivers feel like they can get away with poor driving standards because it's so easy now to mitigate a time penalty. So my solution is that we just need to go back to harsher penalties. And what I mean by that is drive-throughs. It's such an easy deterrent because it would absolutely ruin your race if you had a drive-through penalty. I mean, it would basically take you out of contention. You could be going from, racing for the podium to you're not getting points that day, and you might finish last on the road. So, which does seem a little bit harsh, but what better way to deter somebody from, I'll just cut the chicane here or there because I need to back up the field, or, I'm going to do some blocking, some illegal blocking to hold everybody up, or, I'm going to, like what happened between Carlos Sainz and Oscar Piastri, that can absolutely ruin your race. And so there's an automatic deterrent there from making those decisions and doing those things. You're going to have to race with a little bit more respect and a little bit more caution, and understanding that if something goes wrong, your race is over. So I think there's definitely a driving standards problem in F1. And I think Haas has very clearly, shown that now twice this season, and which is why I believe we need to go back to harsher penalties. And the other thing too is with the time penalty, you can either tack it on to the end of the race, or you can serve it in a pit stop whenever you want. And it's say you get a virtual safety car or safety car that neutralizes the race, boom, done. Your penalty is served, and it does not affect the outcome of that race. And if you don't want to serve it in the pits, you could just tack it on to the ending time of your race. You're battling for the podiums, like, okay, I just passed this person. I just got to finish 5 seconds up the road and it's done. But with the drive-through penalty, it has to be served within 3 laps or you're disqualified from the race. Again, all of that sounds a little bit harsher, but what better way to deter drivers from just straight up poor driving standards than drive-through penalties? I'm interested to see what you all have to think about that. So let us know in the comments, what are your thoughts on Kevin Magnussen? Do we need harsher penalties? Was what he was doing okay? Which in accordance with the rules, he got penalties and he made up for it. So is what it is. All right. So that's moving on from the sprint race, moving right along to the Grand Prix. I'm going to take this team by team, because there are a lot of different talking points throughout each team. And the first one we have to do, Lando Norris is finally, after 111 Grand Prix starts, is finally a Formula One winner. And it's great. I don't think you can find a more popular F1 driver to score their first race win. And maybe in history. I think that is up there with, Lewis Hamilton's first win, Ayrton Senna's first win, Michael Schumacher's first win. Not to say that Lando Norris is on that level, but I'm in terms of driver popularity and impact on the sport, Lando's win is right up there. It was a long time coming. Everybody knew that it was going to happen at some point, and he's been so painfully close so many times. So many podiums without a win, and finally it happens. And the amazing thing about this is it was 100% on merit. There was no rain, there was no chaos. Safety car strategy helped him out a little bit, but he had 30-something laps after the safety car and Max Verstappen right behind him. That is a proper victory. You have to put yourself there. You have to be in a position to take advantage of that. You have to continue to fend off Max Verstappen behind you. It's just so important to know that was 100% on merit. Luck had very little to do with it. And Not only is this a great sign, is this great for Lando, but this is a great sign for McLaren. 12 months ago, they went from Lando Norris finishing P17 and a minute and a half off of Max Verstappen to now winning this race and beating Max Verstappen in a proper fight for victory. This 12-month arc for McLaren between 17th in Miami with Lando Norris 12 months ago to race victory. This has to be one of the new benchmarks, and they have to be the poster child for what development in F1 can be, with the right people doing the right things at the right time with the right amount of progress and putting a lot of time and energy into that. Now, when you look at the team that supplies Mercedes power units, or the team that supplies McLaren power units, which is Mercedes, they still are on this 3-year journey to discover something about these regulations that they haven't. And every single year, it's been, we've finally figured it out. There's a glimmer of hope, and they end up right back where they are. And at this point with Mercedes, it's just empty promises. And then you look at their customer, McLaren is a race winner and is emphatically much faster than Mercedes. And I even think McLaren is now on par or just slightly above Ferrari even. They are going to be, I believe, from here on out, competitive for race victories. Ferrari's going to be in the mix in a little bit, and we'll get into that, but you have McLaren, who just brought this major upgrade, immediately won a race. Oscar Piastri had a little bit down of a weekend, despite the damage that he received from his dust up with Sainz. He wasn't going to finish close to Lando, but he only had half of the upgrades and was still faster than another Red Bull. So I think McLaren is now at a place where they can fight for victories, and with Adrian Newey saying that they're having a hard time finding any more with this platform of car that they have for this generation of car. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, again, McLaren is very circuit specific. Their performance is very circuit specific, but at tracks that suit them, they have to be, in the conversation for victories. I'm especially thinking, Imola and Monaco, maybe not, but when they go to Spain and there are more high speed, turns like there are in Miami, I think, Spain could be another race that they go well at. So I think they need to be in the conversation for victories every single time now. Oscar also had a great race, but since he pitted early, he kind of got shafted. Him more than anybody else got shafted by the safety car, which allowed the Ferraris to kind of leapfrog him on track. He was doing really well, and I think he got screwed by the safety car, which put him in a position where he had to go battle with Carlos Sainz, which ultimately led to him and Sainz coming together, which it was found to be predominantly Carlos Sainz's fault, received a 5-second time penalty, and ended up being fifth in the race, fourth on track. But it's unfortunate because it kind of ruined Oscar Piastri's race after that. So I think he was the biggest loser with that safety car, which is unfortunate. But the huge upgrade package seemed to have worked very well. Lando, again, had 100% of the upgrades. Oscar only had 50%, and he will have the full upgrades in Imola. This, to me, puts them on level or slightly ahead of Ferrari. Not quite as close to Red Bull. I think had Max Verstappen not sustained the floor damage that he had, I think it would have been much more competitive at the very end, and I think he might have been able to pass Lando, and I think it would have been close, and I think Lando could have kept the pressure on Max for the remaining 30 or so laps, but I think that I think they're right on par. They're not quite close to Red Bull, and another reason why I say they're not quite close to Red Bull is just how consistent that car is. It doesn't matter what track we go to. When the Grand Prix circus shows up to whatever track, they're always going to be in the conversation for victory, and that's just the standard that they need to be held to. because that's where they're at. They are, every single track we go to, every single race we have, they are the favorites to win. And I think that's why I say McLaren is not quite on that level. It's just because they don't have that consistency yet. Hopefully this upgrade changes some things, and I think the next two races being Imola and Monaco, I think will their performances there will tell me how this upgrade has helped their circuit specific performance, because they do really poorly at the slow speed stuff. I imagine that will be fixed for 2025, because they're finally starting to see the fruits of this wind tunnel. The 2024 car on a fundamental level is not really informed by the new wind tunnel, but their upgrades and their 2025 and beyond cars will be influenced by the wind tunnel. And if it's anything from like what we've seen at Miami, maybe those upgrades are really, really, that wind tunnel is really pumping out some good upgrades, and we'll see what happens. But I think McLaren's performance we'll be able to get a better idea of how holistic those upgrades are when we see their performance from Imola and Monaco. Moving on down the grid, let's take a look at Red Bull. It was a good weekend for Verstappen, and had it not been for the floor damage received from whacking the bollard and the chicane in Sector 3, probably could have fought for a race win. And it was a very, very, very rare mistake from Max Verstappen. I could probably count on one hand the number of mistakes he's made like that, dating back to 2021. I think, or maybe even before then, but a very rare mistake for Max Verstappen. He is in incredible form, and I think my thing about Max Verstappen and Red Bull, first of all, the sprint race I think is a much better showing for what that team is capable of. I don't think the Grand Prix is a great showing for, at least for Max Verstappen, maybe Sergio Perez, but I think, I wouldn't say that Red Bull is cooked. I think it's a result of some damage. Even with all the damage that he had, he only finished 6 or 7 seconds behind Lando Norris on track, and won the sprint race. So obviously very good. Max Verstappen and Lando Norris are very good friends. And he even said in the post-race interview, if there's anybody that I want to lose to, it's Lando Norris. And I think I would be shocked if anybody didn't feel like that on the grid. The number of drivers that came up to him after his win to congratulate him was incredible to see. But it's just a very rare mistake for Max Verstappen. Anybody that says Red Bull is cooked, I think is, not really looking at things. And we keep thinking whether or not, this off-track distraction from, with Red Bull, with Adrian Newey, with Christian Horner and the allegations against him is going to distract them. And it doesn't seem like they're slowing down at all. If anything, I just think that teams are starting to catch up to them. And I think that's making them a little bit vulnerable from a technical side of things, but from an operational perspective, like on the ground during the races and race weekends, they don't seem like they're, really vulnerable at all. And I don't think that these things are distracting them. I think it will eventually catch up to them, but they don't seem like they're being distracted now. And I think it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back in Imola. It was a tougher weekend, though, for Sergio Perez, finishing behind Leclerc and both Ferraris on track in the Grand Prix. It's not the results he needs in order to justify him keeping his seat, so he needs to bounce back in Imola, which might be harder or easier said than done, given McLaren has this huge upgrade package and Ferrari will have a huge upgrade package there at Imola, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, Sergio Perez, I think, just had an off weekend, definitely needs to bounce back, and it'll be interesting to see if in a couple, maybe in a month or so, if this kind of is the start of a downward trend for Sergio Perez. And it is a little bit concerning for me just because the gap from Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen is pretty much the same, But as these teams start to edge closer and closer to Red Bull, there's going to be more and more drivers finishing ahead of Sergio Perez. And we saw that in the sprint with Ferrari and Charles Leclerc being able to get ahead of Sergio Perez there in the sprint race. And both Ferraris finished ahead of Sergio Perez on track. So I think that's definitely a cause for concern. If I'm Red Bull, I'm not hitting the panic button yet by any stretch of the imagination. I'm still I'm still definitely backing Sergio Perez. I think he needs to be the number one candidate for that seat, but you need to be able to bounce back, and those results need to be few and far between. So we'll see how that continues to develop over the course of the next couple weeks. Imola and next Monaco will be two tough tests for Red Bull. As I said before, McLaren has a big upgrade that seemed to have helped them in the slow speeds, and right now, which is also right now Ferrari's strength, and they should be getting stronger with the upgrade in Imola. Speaking of Ferrari, their result was probably the maximum that they could have gotten. P2 in the sprint for Charles, which is great for both of them to finish ahead of Sergio Perez on track. And it could have been P2 for Charles in the Grand Prix, but since he pitted so early, it allowed Lando Norris to leapfrog from 5th to 1st because he went so long on the tires in the first. And honestly, even if they had all pitted together, I think that safety car brought out. I think Lando Norris could have been challenging for the lead anyway because he was as quick as he was. But it was that safety car and the Ferraris pitting so early there that allowed Max Verstappen to get ahead of them, and a slight tire advantage as well. The penalty for Sainz was applied after the race for the contact with Sergio Perez or Oscar Piastri, which ultimately ruined Oscar's race because he had to pit for a new front wing. And I think it was very much warranted, and it led to Perez ending up finishing ahead of him at the end results. It did affect his race, and I think he could have probably been as fast as Lando had he not had the floor damage received, and he said as much. He said given the amount of floor damage that they had and how fast he was in the early parts of the race, he said he could have been as fast as the leaders and maybe have challenged for a podium had that floor damage not happened. But again, that penalty was definitely deserved. So he just completely missed the apex, turned into Lando Norris into Oscar Piastri, and it was avoidable contact, and I have no issues with that penalty at all. Speaking of Ferrari, I know we've talked a little bit about their upgrade recently, and it's important to note. It is very important to note that they will have a new upgrade package in Imola. And Fred Vasseur has even come out after the race and said that there's no reason why they can't be regularly fighting for victories after this upgrade. It's rumored to be about 3 or 4 tenths of a second, which is what I think the advantage, the swing in performance ended up being for McLaren in Miami. The thing is I just think that Ferrari's floor is a lot higher than McLaren's, and so I think their ceiling is also a little bit higher, and I think this is going to put them much more in contention with Red Bull. They had their first major upgrade package come in Japan, and now teams are getting upgrades and are close to them and fighting for victories. Adrian Newey has said that they're struggling to find extra gains in performance with upgrades that are coming, and I think I would not be surprised if for the remainder of the season, Ferrari and McLaren end up being threats for victory, particularly with Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, and Lando Norris. And maybe this is also a good sign for Oscar Piastri. Maybe he gets his first Grand Prix win later this season. I don't know. But Ferrari do have this major upgrade coming in Imola, which we know is going to be at least a little bit from the side pods, from what we've seen, a more this year Red Bull style side pod and radiator inlet with the lip that goes over the letterbox opening of the radiator in it is now on top, in line kind of with the nose cone part of the chassis, a lot like what Red Bull have now. And it seems like Ferrari is kind of starting to go in that direction. That seems like what their upgrade in Imola is going to look like. So it'll be interesting to see, and which is good, because if that means Ferrari can win on home soil in Italy, everyone's going to like that, particularly us here at the Formula One Bros, who are indeed Ferrari fans. Going on further down the field, encouraging yet mixed results for RB. It was good to see Daniel Ricciardo back up in the sprint race. As I mentioned before, Yuki Tsunoda had a really great Grand Prix, but Daniel Ricciardo didn't have a great Grand Prix, so it'll be interesting to see how they go moving forward. And Imola, the next race, is kind of a home track for them, with their base being in Faenza. Haas continues to impress with their pace, and to me it seems like they are now leading the midfield behind Aston Martin and RB. They had a great weekend. They're much more consistent, particularly in the hands of Nico Hülkenberg. Mercedes struggles continue as Hamilton finishes P6 and Russell P8 in the Grand Prix. This is an interesting situation for Mercedes, since they're the team that provides engines to McLaren, and McLaren is just far and above the better team. I know I've mentioned it before. Additionally on that, the comparison of progress that McLaren has made in just 12 months compared to Mercedes' progress or lack thereof, honestly, to me is a little shocking. If I'm Mercedes, I'm taking a really, really hard, good look internally at what is happening, every aspect of that. And honestly, you're looking at, maybe you start to look at Toto Wolff. Can he manage this team the way that he needs to? And I tell you what, I'm wondering if we're starting to see the results of Niki Lauda no longer being there. Remember, Niki Lauda passed away just ahead of the Monaco Grand Prix in 2019. Their advantage kind of stayed baked in with 2020 because of the COVID-19 shutdown. And then 2021, you saw them kind of miss a little bit of marks and were not as dominant and as fast in 2021. And then 2022 onwards, with these new ground effect regulations, they've just not been able to get off the floor. They haven't been able to get themselves going and have showed no signs of even remotely close to being able to understand these regulations and getting back to the form of Mercedes that we all have come to know. But this honestly might be just the new normal for Mercedes without in a post Niki Lauda era. But, maybe you also start to look at Toto Wolff, who inherited a team at its heights. So it'll be interesting to see how they keep going. Tough weekend for Williams, which wasn't aided by Logan Sargent and Kevin Magnussen coming together during the Grand Prix, which brought out the safety car. Also a tough weekend for Aston Martin, as it seems they may have been eclipsed by RB or maybe even Haas. I'd like to think that this was just kind of an off weekend, but they're definitely going to need to bounce back and have some good results in Imola. And they did not seem like their normal selves this weekend. I will say it was a very encouraging weekend for Alpine. Ocon scoring a point, which means they are now off the board for the season, and Gasly not far behind in P12. It seems like they are truly on an upward trend and are very slowly but surely making progress towards the sharp end of the midfield. I believe they still have a bit of ways to go, but it's encouraging to see that they've had some good back-to-back performances. They had a great weekend out in China and another one here, and I think they're really starting to make some progress. And Kick Sauber kind of seems to be a little bit in no man's land. A couple tough outings in China and now here. Pretty anonymous weekend for them overall. Not really a threat for points at any point during the race. There were flashes of brilliance from both Zhou Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas at different times during the weekend, but just kind of overall an anonymous weekend for that team. So after race number 6 here in Miami, the driver standings are Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, who is tied with Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, Yuki Tsunoda. That's your top 10. Starting in 11th is Lance Stroll, Oliver Behrman, Nico Hülkenberg, Daniel Ricciardo, Esteban Ocon, Kevin Magnussen, Alex Albon, Zhou Guanyu, Pierre Gasly, Valtteri Bottas, and Logan Sargent. That is your 21 drivers so far. Constructor standings are pretty much all remain the same, but Ferrari edges closer to Red Bull. Red Bull's first, Ferrari's second, third is McLaren. Fourth is Mercedes, fifth is Aston Martin, sixth is Visa Cash App Racing Bulls, seventh is Haas, Alpine is in eighth, Williams is in ninth, and Kick Sauber is in 10th. News from around F1. This is some stuff that we didn't get to cover because James and I have both been very busy. So I just kind of want to quickly recap some news from around F1 because a lot's been going on between China and now. The first of which was Nico Hülkenberg is off to Sauber for 2025 with the ultimate end game of being an Audi driver in 2026. Don't know much about his deal, but it's likely a 3-year deal, which is a 2 years confirmed plus a team option for the 3rd year. And I say that just because that kind of seems to be the standard from now on. Audi has made it very clear that this is an Audi signing. This is not a Sauber signing. This is an Audi signing, and it is to prepare for Nico Hülkenberg to be Audi's driver for 2026 when they officially take over Sauber. Who partners him and where does this leave Carlos Sainz? It definitely takes away some of the incentive. For Carlos Sainz to go to Audi. If there any were in place. The two of them have been teammates before, but this signing might take away the number one status and role that Sainz likely would have been looking for with that team. So I think it kind of takes the shine a little bit away from Audi. And I think this might mean that he could be very heavily looking at Red Bull. But we know Red Bull want to keep Sergio Perez, so I think this kind of extends the waiting game a little bit for Carlos Sainz in terms of where he's going to end up next year. He has time. It's not a big deal, but I think this takes the sweetness away from a little bit of this deal and throws a little bit more emphasis on him trying to be a Red Bull driver. The other bombshell news is that Adrian Newey will be leaving Red Bull at the end of 2024, which, if I'm being completely honest, given everything, the news that has been coming out of that team and the turmoil that team is under, I'm not surprised. A high-profile and high-level figure such as Adrian Newey has left. I don't think that this has much bearing on Max Verstappen because Max Verstappen's future, he has made very adamant, is tied to Helmut Marko. Helmut Marko doesn't seem like he's going anywhere. But what does this mean for Adrian Newey? He will be done with the F1 team at the end of 2024, but is staying on for their hypercar project, which concludes during the first quarter of 2025. So where does he go next? I don't really know, and likely probably won't be going anywhere next year. If he goes anywhere, it'll probably be to start working on the 2026 regulations and probably be just involved in that project. We do know that Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston Martin, and Williams, which is the team that he got his start in F1 with, have all been trying to court him. But for me, I actually am willing to bet that he's closer to retirement than signing for any of those teams. As a Ferrari fan, as much as I would love to see Adrian Newey be designing our cars going forward, I just think that he's done it all in F1. What more is there to do? The number of championships that he's won with his cars is insane. He is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, F1 designers of all time. I mean, he's up there with Gordon Murray. So I just think that he's done it all in F1, and I imagine that he is probably closer to retirement than anything. And the last little bit of news, which actually came out during the Grand Prix weekend this weekend in Miami, that Mercedes has filed a petition with the FIA to grant Andrea Kimi Antonelli a waiver to receive his super license prior to the time when he turns 18. So he has the super license points. At this point, all he has to do is turn 18, and he is granted a super license. Now, this petition is significant because his birthday is August of this year. So that means that Mercedes be trying to get him an F1 debut this season? Possibly. I know Mercedes has talked about well, not Mercedes themselves, but there has been talk about Andrea Kimi Antonelli being getting a start, maybe even as soon as Imola. Mercedes came out and said that's definitely not happening. Where would he go? Maybe Williams, and I think that's largely dependent on Logan Sargent. But it doesn't seem like they're really pushing for that, and Mercedes came out and said, no, it's not for Imola. So what happens, I don't really know. It's interesting to see. Maybe they're starting to prep something for the summer break, or maybe before the summer break. I'm not really sure where this leaves us, but it is interesting, and it'll see what the FIA does for that. Well, that is all the time that we have. If there's anything that we left out, anything else you would like to hear, let us know in the comments. Let us know what your thoughts are on the Miami Grand Prix. Overall, I thought it was a great weekend, much better than the races that we had. The race that we had last year, 2022, was a banger with all of the battling between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. Last year was kind of but this year was great, and there was battling up and down the field. I mean, and that's, you can tell that just by the fact that the Alpines were going side by side through the chicane section of Sector 3. Like there was hardcore battling all the way up and down the track, through the field. Some good side-by-side action. So all in all, I think it was a great weekend for Miami. Let us know what your thoughts are, and I am looking forward to seeing y'all next time as we gear up for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix.